So I've been stuck at home for a couple days with this coronavirus outbreak right now. So I decided I was gonna start a little project, and that was gonna be making a knife out of this old saw blade I had laying around. You can see here, all the teeth are pretty messed up, and it's no longer usable as a blade. To start out, I just took the blade to the bench grinder and removed all the teeth so I would have a easier piece of raw stock to work with that was a more uniform size. Once the saw blade was prepared, I was able to use it as a little bit of a guide for my design and decided, because of the material thickness, to go with a kitchen utility knife design. Once I had my design, I just cut it out of paper to make a template and glued it directly onto the blade so that I could then cut it out. I started with the angle grinder, and that was really helpful for removing a lot of the bulk material. Once I had the basic shape roughed in, the next task was marking and drilling out the holes for pins. I just used a hand drill and a 1/8 inch drill bit here to drill out these holes, but a drill press would work great. Next, I cleaned up the surfaces with my orbital sander. To create the bevels on the blade, I used a very makeshift file guide jig. In the future, I plan to build a real jig that I can use for future knife making projects. I decided to give the blade a little bit of a drop point, so here I just took it back to the bench grind. I started trying to do my heat treating outside, but eventually I had to move in to get the blade up to temperature. Unfortunately, I'm a little bit out of frame. Here's what the blade ended up looking like after being heat treated. I didn't get any footage of it, but after the heat treat I did a temper in my kitchen oven, and then just did some cleaning up of the blade with some different sandpapers. For the handle scales, I decided to just use some scrapped pieces of oak trim I had lying around, and I just used the table saw to get those pieces down to the rough dimensions I wanted. I lined up the scales with my knife blank and drilled out the holes for the pin. My camera ended up dying, so I lost the footage, but I have already attached the knife scales here with 3 brass pins, and then I'm using a combination of a portable belt sander and just hand sanding to finish shaping the oak handle scales. Once I was happy with the scales, I just applied a finishing coat of boiled linseed oil, just rubbing it on and trying to get it into all the pores of the wood. The final step for me was putting a edge on the blade, and for that I use the Lansky sharpening system, which usually gives me fairly consistent results. Here is the final product, the result of about 6 hours of work for me, and I'm pretty happy with it for just using materials I had on hand and not working with anything really fancy. I think in the future, one area I'd really like to improve is the bevels, because I think that's where this knife really needs some improvement. Here was its first test in the kitchen, and it worked pretty well. No complaints, so overall I'd call this a success.